Meantime, for more on the New Hampshire primary, we want to bring in Judd Gregg. He's the former New Hampshire governor and senator. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Let me just start by asking you to try to handicap it from what you've seen in the polls and anecdotally what you know.
Well, New Hampshire is historically unpredictable and very fluid. People make their mind up very late. But I think the Dixville Notch results are sort of entertaining in the fact that it shows the people, number one, were listening, and number two, are willing to think outside the box if Mike Bloomberg can get 3 of the 5 votes there.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My sense is that Bernie Sanders is going to win because he's got this base, which is a socialist movement within the Democratic Party here. That's probably 20 to 30% of the party here. But that the vast majority of people who are voting are not going to be voting for Bernie Sanders. They're going to be looking for an alternative who they think can beat the president in November. And if you look at the field right now, I don't think that person is showing up. So I actually think the winner coming out of New Hampshire is probably going to be Mike Bloomberg, because every time Sanders wins an election, I think mainstream Democrats are saying to themselves, oh, my goodness, we can't nominate a socialist. And who can we nominate who can beat the president?
Well, let me ask you, related to that question, related to that question, though, is, you look at where Biden stands in the polls, you look at where Biden stood in the vote in Iowa. Is that a commentary on Vice President Biden himself? Is that a commentary on this idea of a moderate Democrat, or do you think it's something else?
No, I don't think it's a commentary on the moderate Democrat theme, because I think Amy Klobuchar is going to very much beat expectations here. I wouldn't be surprised if she ran second. And Buttigieg, the same thing. I mean, he's basically those two are the moderates in the race right now that have traction. But my sense is, and unfortunately for Joe, who I like and I respect, and I think he'd be a very decent president, I think the train may have left the station on that campaign. But as a very practical matter, I still think the Democratic Party is in this throes of having the threat of nominating a socialist. And that totally is not going to sell in America. I mean, it may sell to the base, but it's not going to sell in America. It's not going to sell in New Hampshire. It's not going to sell in the Midwest. And so they're looking around for somebody to replace, who can take on Sanders in the nominating process and the president in the general election. And who knows who that's going to be. But Mike Bloomberg seems to have the money to try it anyway.
Senator, if you're right, though, I mean, this goes to the question of whether you think when the voter goes into the booth and actually presses the button, whether they're actually thinking about who can beat the president in this case or the other side, as opposed to who they support or want to support more.
Well, I think a voter's thinking both thoughts. In the Democratic primary, they're going in, they want to vote for somebody they can identify with politically, and then they want to have that person be a viable candidate in the general election. I don't think those are exclusive thoughts. I think they're very much intertwined. And you've got to remember, in our primary up here, independents can vote in the election. And there's no race on the Republican side. So you're going to have a lot of what I would call right-leaning independents, folks who basically may have been Republicans that are now independent because they're frustrated with the president, who are generally independent but tend to be fiscally conservative. Those are the folks I used to get a lot of votes out of. They're going to be voting in the Democratic primary. They're not going to be voting for Sanders. And somebody who hasn't been mentioned a lot, Elizabeth Warren, she sort of faded too.
Talking about being fiscally conservative.
Because they just don't believe in that philosophy.
Talking about being fiscally conservative, can I just pivot the conversation? I'm curious what your thought was on the administration's budget proposal, which we all read yesterday.
It was a joke.
What'd you say?
It's a joke.
It's a joke.
It's a joke.
I mean,
it's a terrible proposal. It's not rational. If you're going to balance the budget in 15 years, you're going to run $1 trillion deficits for the extension of his term. He's not willing to address what's driving our deficit, which is entitlement spending in the Medicare accounts primarily, but also Social Security. Basically, it's hide your head in the sand and hope nobody notices the fact that the country's careening towards a very significant fiscal problem on our debt side. Excuse me?
Is this a present to Democrats?
They want more. We're going to have one. We're going to have
Democrats are even worse. I mean, you look at the Democratic proposals.
We're going to have Yarmouth
on. Look at the Democratic proposals across the board. I don't mean to talk over somebody, but you look at the Democratic proposals across the board, and they're adding trillions, hundreds of trillions of dollars of new spending to a government which is already $22 trillion in debt and is headed towards 100% debt to GDP ratio. It's incomprehensible what's being proposed on the Democratic side.
Nancy Pelosi said that what's happening here is, these are brazenly inflicting savage multi-million-dollar cuts. Meanwhile, entitlement spending is going to rise 54% over the next decade. 54% on entitlements. And discretionary spending basically stays flat. The other thing that the Journal points out is that revenue have continued to rise despite the tax cuts, up 6% in the first 4 months of this year. But spending is rising so much. And we're going to have people come on today that say there's no infrastructure here and we need to spend more here. So they're going to complain about the deficit, the Democrats, but they're going to actually say what they don't like about the deal is that there's not even more spending, right?
We do not have a revenue problem, Joe. Right. Basically, our revenues are growing. The economy is growing, and when the economy grows, revenues grow. We have a spending problem. The spending problem is driven almost entirely by the issue of entitlement spending and specifically Medicare. And soon Medicaid, which will dwarf Medicare as a cost as the seniors move into long-term care. Yeah. And nobody's willing to address it on either side of the aisle.